This is chapter 49 on the brain. This is the arc reflex. We're doing a lab on this, so this should make things a little bit easier. But there are some neurons in your body that are extremely long, and the reason is because there are certain activities that you do not want to have a extended period of time in order to send signals from one neuron to the next, and all the way back to your brain. So the arc reflex is designed to be like an involuntary response. So what you have is you have a sensory neuron. So for example, if you've ever been to the doctor and they tap your knee, that is going to send you're going to sense that, and that's going to send an information to directly to your spinal cord, which is going to affect a motor neuron, which is going to send back a reflex, and that's where you kick the leg up. This would also come into play, like if you, the example we do in the lab is a hand on a hot stove. If you had to go through several neurons and through your brain to process that information, by the time you put your hand on the stove and the neuron sent the signal and your brain processed that signal and it sent it back, you would probably have a burn. And so this is designed for safety. And so you would actually reflex and pull your hand away before your brain even registers what you did. That's what the arc reflex is. The sensory neuron senses it, and then the motor neuron creates a reaction. And there might be a small interneuron there. I mentioned this in the last video, but your nervous system is made out of the central nervous system, which is your brain and spinal cord, and then the peripheral nervous system, which is going to be all of the nerves. And some of your nerves, like the ones in your legs, are really, really long, and some of them are a little bit shorter. Arousal and sleep are things that are regulated by the brainstem and the cerebrum. Arousal is a state of awareness of the external world. Sleep is a state in which external stimuli are received but not consciously perceived. The brain is still active, but you're not consciously perceiving that information. Although sleep is essential to survival, scientists still don't know much about it. All birds and mammals show signs of sleep and wake cycles. Bottlenose dolphins swim while sleeping, rising to the surface to breathe air on a regular basis. Just interesting facts. Dolphins sleep with one eye open and one closed, which could mean that just one side of the brain was asleep. Researchers collected EEG recordings and confirmed that that is the correct hypothesis. Your biological clock, circadian rhythm, we talked about this before, is a daily cycle, or what you consider like a biological clock. Cycles of sleep and wakefulness are just one example of a circadian rhythm. Typical biological clocks are synchronized to light and dark in the environment, but when you're without those cues, studies show that most individuals continue to maintain that 24-hour cycle. So it is not necessarily triggered by the external stimuli of light and dark. Surgically removing the suprachiasmatic nucleus, not even sure how to put it, the CSN, or SCN, is in the hypothalamus of lab rats, cause the animal to lack rhythmicity in behaviors. By transplanting brain tissue between normal and mutant hamsters, scientists demonstrated that the SCN determines the circadian rhythm of the whole animal. These are frequency waves of sleep and arousal. So the left hemisphere, this shows the, I think this was a study they did in the dolphins. I can't remember now why I had this one in here. So we've got low frequency waves, characteristics of sleep, and then high characteristics. Hello, hang on one second. I can't pause this. Okay, my daughter walked in. So yeah, this is the dolphin study. And so you can see the dolphins can actually be asleep and awake depending on which hemisphere. And so you'll see that this is sleep right here. And that's the left hemisphere, but at the same time, the right hemisphere is characteristic of frequencies characteristic of wakefulness. So they determine that the reason they can swim and sleep at the same time is because only one half of their brain is actually asleep. Cool stuff. This is the different parts or regions of the brain. You can see embryo at 1 month versus 5 weeks, so 4 weeks versus 5 weeks, so just simply a week later, the difference. And then a child's brain, and it shows you where all of the different parts are. So these are the first parts that form the forebrain, the midbrain, and the hindbrain, and then that divides into different parts, which then divides into the more advanced parts. The cerebrum is going to be kind of the outer layer of the main brain. The diencephalon, which is right here, is going to include your thalamus, hypothalamus, and epithalamus. We're going to learn about some of those parts here in a little bit. The midbrain is right here, and that's going to be part of your brainstem. That's going to include a lot of involuntary movements, a lot of survival things. Pons is going to be part of the brainstem and the cerebrum. That's right here. And the medulla oblongata. That one is so funny to say. I'll say all the time. It's right down here. And that's all going to connect then into your spinal cord. The cerebrum. So let's talk about what they do, and I'll kind of keep going back to the picture. The cerebrum is going to control your skeletal muscle contractions and is the center for learning, emotion, memory, and perception. That does a lot of things. It's divided into the right and the left cerebral hemispheres. The cerebral cortex is responsible for perception, voluntary movement, and learning. The left side receives information from and controls movement to the right side and vice versa. There's actually an interesting study that has to do with that later on. The corpus callosum enables the right and the left side of the brains to communicate. So here you go. Here's the cerebrum. You've got the cerebral cortex, the outer layer here, this corpus callosum. The cerebrum is back down here. That's like towards the back of your head. Left and right, and then the corpus callosum is going to enable the two hemispheres here to speak to each other, communicate, not really speak. The cerebellum coordinates movement and balance and helps in learning and remembering motor skills. The diencephalon gives rise to the thalamus and the hypothalamus. The thalamus is the main input center for sensory information going to the cerebrum. Information is sorted and then sent to the appropriate center for processing. The hypothalamus contains the body's thermostat and central biological clock. It regulates hunger, thirst, plays a role in sexual and mating behaviors, and controls the fight or flight response. This is kind of your survival thing. Here's just another picture of it showing the diencephalon, which is the thalamus, and the hypothalamus that we just talked about right in there. The brainstem consists of the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla oblongata. The midbrain receives information and sends it to a specific region of the forebrain. The pons and the medulla transfer information from the peripheral nerves to the midbrain and the forebrain, helps coordinate large-scale body movements. And remember that the right side controls the left and the left controls the right. And the medulla is the main homeostatic functions like breathing, heart, blood vessel activity, swallowing, digesting, and vomiting. So those are all involuntary activities, although my husband still thinks vomiting is a voluntary action. It is not. It is involuntary, and that's controlled by the medulla. Emotions, your amygdala is the big emotion center of the brain. A lot of emotional studies and stuff they do, they are looking at changes to the amygdala. It's involved in emotional memory, so a lot of times they can actually damage that. If you have like post-traumatic issues, they can damage part of the amygdala to take away that emotional memory. Researchers present adults with an image followed by an unpleasant experience, such as a mild electrical shock. That is really funny to me. Participants experience automatic arousal when they see the picture. They sweat and have an increased heart rate. So basically shows that they have that memory, the emotional memory of that. So they see an image, they get a shock, and then you show them that image again, and they automatically start to have the response because they think they're going to get the shock. Because they've formed an emotional memory with that picture. Subjects with brain damage to the amygdala can recall the image because memory is intact, but they do not exhibit the automatic arousal, indicating reduced capacity for emotional memory. That's kind of interesting as far as noting that what happens when there's damage to it. And so here's the amygdala. The cerebral cortex, the outer layer of the cerebrum in which the cognitive functions reside. Neurobiologists refer to different lobes: the frontal, temporal, occipital, and parietal. Each one has a different function, and depending on, like, if you have damage to those, might depend on what your problem is. So here's the frontal lobe. Decision making and planning. My husband was in a car accident when he was about 17, and he heavily damaged the frontal lobe of his brain. And he still struggles with. He makes good decisions, but he's very impulsive, and that's one of the problems. He doesn't plan well because of that damage there. He will make a decision and just like go for it and not really think it through. The motor cortex here is going to control the skeletal muscles. Then you've got the parietal lobe here, a sense of touch, sensory integration. So you sense something and it integrates or transfers that into some kind of a response. Your visual cortex, so where you actually process visual things. Let's see what else. Oh, your auditory cortex, so that's your hearing. That's part of your temporal lobe. Wernicke's area is actually part of where you can comprehend language. And Broca's area is where you can form speech. So they've done some really interesting studies with people that have Broca area issues where they could see images and recognize that they can draw it, but then they can't tell you what it is. Like you can show them a picture. I think I have it maybe on the slide, but you can show them like a picture of a sun, and you can say, "What did you see?" And they'll be like, and they don't know, but they can draw you a picture of what they saw, and then they look at it and they're like, "Oh, that's a sun." So they have problems with speech. It's kind of interesting. I think I have something on that thing. So what do scientists do? Doctors and scientists, they will actually study these by looking at, like, they would give you a word, and when you hear it, they would look at where it lights up. So the darker the color or closer to red, the more activity that's happening there. That's how they figured out a lot of this information of what parts of your brain do what. This is really interesting. Frontal lobe function. Phineas Gage was working as a foreman in a railroad construction crew when an explosion drove a meter-long iron rod through his head. Afterwards, his personality changed dramatically. He became emotionally detached, impatient, and erratic in his behavior. This is sometimes seen when tumors develop in this region as well. I don't know if you watch Grey's Anatomy and all, but they had an episode where one of the doctors, it was a OB, prenatal surgeon, and she was having some very erratic behaviors due to her tumor growing in her brain. This is a picture of Phineas Gage and his big, large iron rod. These are just things of interest. They're in the last section of your textbook, 49.5. You probably aren't interested in this unless you have a personal connection with them. But schizophrenia is a mental disturbance characterized by psychotic episodes in which patients have a distorted perception of reality. People with schizophrenia typically experience hallucinations, such as they hear voices or delusions that they think that others are plotting against them, or there's some kind of deception going on. Schizophrenia actually refers to fragmentation of what are normally integrated brain functions. So they've got some evidence that suggests that there are some neural pathways that use dopamine as a neurotransmitter. First, the drug amphetamine speed, which stimulates dopamine release, can produce the same set of symptoms as schizophrenia. And so they've dubbed that may be one of the problems. Second, many of the drugs that alleviate the symptoms of schizophrenia block the dopamine receptors, so that gives them more evidence that it might be partly to deal with that. Depression, it's characterized by depressed mood as well as abnormalities of sleep, appetite, and energy level. There's also the example of bipolar, which is actually kind of a manic and depressive, kind of a swing in that. This has to do, I believe, with dopamine. Dopamine and serotonin are two of the like feel-good drugs in your brain, natural neurotransmitters. And so a lot of times antidepressants have they mimic those kind of things because you're either lacking serotonin, dopamine, you're not forming enough, or for some reason the neurons are not picking it up. Addiction has actually been looked at as part of your brain, basically doing that. In the absence of drug addiction, the reward system of the brain provides motivation for activities that enhance survival and reproduction, such as eating in response to hunger, drinking when thirsty, engaging in sexual activity when aroused. An addicted individual wanting is instead directed toward further drug consumption. So they basically are consumed by that. It says here in the book that inputs to the reward system are received by neurons in a region near the base of the brain called the ventral tegmental area, VTA. When activated, these neurons release dopamine from active terminals in specific regions of the cerebrum, including the nucleus accumbens. Addictive drugs affect the reward system in several ways. First, each drug has an immediate and direct effect that enhances the activity of the dopamine pathway. As addiction develops, there are also long-lasting changes in the reward circuitry. The result is a craving for the drug independent of any pleasure associated with consumption. Part of your mouse addiction looks at what different drugs do to the brain. Alzheimer's disease is a mental deterioration or dementia characterized by confusion and memory loss. Its incidence is age-related. It's progressive. They gradually become less able to function, eventually needing to be dressed, bathed, and fed by others. They lose their ability to recognize people, including their immediate family, and may treat them with suspicion and hostility. It basically leads to the death of neurons in many areas of the brain, including the hippocampus and cerebral cortex. As a result, there is often massive shrinkage of brain tissue. Post-mortem examination of the remaining brain tissue reveals two characteristic features: amyloid plaques and neurofibrillary tangles. And so basically the neurons are not communicating the way that they should. And Parkinson's disease is a motor disorder. It includes muscle tremors, poor balance, flexed posture, and a shuffling gait. Facial muscles become rigid, limiting the ability of patients to vary their expressions. Like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's disease is progressive. Brain illness is more common with advanced age. The symptoms result from the death of neurons in the midbrain and normally release dopamine at synapses at the basal nuclei. As with Alzheimer's, protein aggregates accumulate. In most cases of Parkinson's lack an identifiable cause. However, a rare form of the disease that appears in relatively young adults has a clear genetic basis. So all of those are fairly interesting, probably more interesting to you if you know somebody that has one. You can always go to that section and read a little bit more about it. All right, and that's it.